What if the God we were never told about was the key to unlocking everything we thought we knew about faith, power, and the very origins of the universe, hidden in the blank spaces of history, erased from sacred texts? Buried beneath myth and fear there lies a divine presence, forgotten by time. This is not just a mystery, it's a spiritual conspiracy millennia in the making. In the grand story of human history, our civilizations have always carried within them the echoes of the divine. Across continents and cultures, gods have shaped empires, inspired temples, and defined moral codes. Yet, for every god whose name adorned temples and scrolls, there were others whose stories vanished, not through the erosion of time, but through deliberate omission. This is where our journey begins, not with the gods who were remembered, but with those who were intentionally forgotten. When we open the scriptures of ancient traditions, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the Hebrew Bible to the Greek myths, we often focus on the dominant figures, Yahweh, Ra, Zeus, Odin. But surrounding these towering beings are blank spaces, entire pantheons whose names were erased, whose worship was forbidden, and whose domains were reassigned to others. This wasn't simply a result of fading memory. In many cases, it was a calculated purge. Why? Who benefits from forgetting a god? To understand this, we must acknowledge a simple truth. Theology is power. The shaping of divine narratives has always been about more than faith. It has been about politics, control, and the authority to define truth. Throughout ancient history, the rise of one god often required the fall of another. Monotheistic revolutions, imperial conquests, and priestly reforms all contributed to the silencing of certain deities. Some were deemed too dangerous, too foreign, too unorthodox to survive in the new religious order. Take, for example, the mysterious disappearance of Asherah, once venerated as the consort of Yahweh in early Israelite religion. Archaeological evidence, inscriptions, figurines, and temple remnants suggests that she played a significant role in early Hebrew worship. Yet, by the time the Old Testament was finalized, her name had been purged, her image demonized, and her memory all but erased. Why? Because the evolving theology of monotheism could not accommodate her presence. Or consider the case of the Mesopotamian god Enki, a deity of wisdom, magic, and creation. Though deeply revered in early Sumerian and Babylonian texts, his attributes were gradually absorbed by other deities or rewritten in opposition to newer theological frameworks. As theological power shifted from polytheism to centralized monotheistic systems, the old gods either faded or were demonized. What Enki once represented, autonomous wisdom, secret knowledge, fluid boundaries, became dangerous in a world increasingly defined by rigid religious orthodoxy. These forgotten gods weren't merely omitted. They were suppressed because they threatened prevailing spiritual hierarchies. They introduced ambiguity where order was desired, multiplicity where unity was imposed, and in the vacuum left by their erasure, new narratives were constructed, narratives that often served political institutions, priestly classes, or conquering empires. Ancient conspiracy, perhaps. Or perhaps it's simply the recurring pattern of human civilization, to rewrite the past in the image of the present. But here's the unsettling truth. Even though these gods were removed from altars and scrolls. Their influence never truly disappeared. They lingered in the margins, in symbols, in rituals, in the myths that refused to die. And if we look closely enough, we begin to see their fingerprints on everything, from the architecture of cathedrals to the symbols of secret societies, from the whispers in apocryphal texts to the persistent archetypes in our collective psyche. What happens when we begin to question what we've been taught? When we dig into the ancient layers that were hidden, not by accident, but by design. In the next part, we'll follow the whispers from the void, ancient scrolls, forbidden texts, and cryptic messages that point to a divine presence still pulsing beneath the surface of mainstream religion. And perhaps, as we peer into the forgotten corners of the sacred, we'll find something more dangerous and more liberating than we ever imagined: the truth. As the whispers of antiquity rise from dusty scrolls and forgotten tombs, we find ourselves immersed in a realm of mystery, a void where the names of lost deities echo faintly through the cracks of time. This part of our journey takes us deeper into obscure writings and ancient scriptures that have long been cast aside, apocryphal texts, hidden scrolls, and cryptic fragments etched in stone, to uncover the voices of the gods who once walked among mortals, but whose memories have been deliberately silenced. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, buried for centuries in desert caves, lie hints of divine figures unknown to most modern readers. These aren't just forgotten characters. They are gods whose worship predates many of today's major religions. Texts like the Book of Enoch, long excluded from biblical canon, reference not only angels and watchers, but also powerful divine entities, whose roles are veiled in symbolism. Could these be remnants of a pantheon that once coexisted alongside the familiar names of Yahweh or Elohim? In the Nag Hammadi scriptures, Gnostic texts unearthed in Egypt in 1945, we encounter entities like the invisible spirit, Barbelo, or Yaldabaoth, who play critical roles. In the Gnostic cosmology, these names were deemed heretical by early church fathers, their narratives suppressed in favor of a more unified theology. But why? What threat did these stories pose? Even in mainstream scriptures, cryptic references persist. The Psalms speak of a divine council. Genesis hints at a plurality in creation. Let us make man in our image. Who is the us? Some say it refers to the Trinity. Others argue it's a vestige of a broader pantheon that was later streamlined to monotheism. These questions, left unanswered, linger like echoes in the void. Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from Canaan to Greece, we see familiar patterns, stories of creator gods, sky beings, divine rebellions, and veiled consorts. In Sumerian myths, the god Enki held secrets of civilization. In Canaanite tradition, El and Asherah were the progenitors of divine children. But as empires rose and religions merged or clashed, certain names were exalted while others were erased. The victors wrote the theology. Even the goddesses, embodiments of fertility, wisdom, and cosmic balance, were often stripped of their divine status and absorbed into male-dominated religious structures. The void deepened, yet the similarities across cultures are astonishing. The hidden gods bear familiar traits associated with light, chaos, wisdom, or the underworld. Are these archetypes encoded in our collective memory, resurfacing in different forms across civilizations? Or were they once universally worshipped and only later fragmented by time and politics? The mystery isn't just in their names or symbols, it's in the deliberate omission. Entire lines of divine ancestry, entire cosmologies, have been overwritten or spiritualized beyond recognition. Who made these decisions? And more importantly, what were they trying to hide? These whispers from the void are not silent anymore. They call to those willing to listen, to those who dare question what has been handed down and peer beyond the surface of sacred texts. As we continue this journey, we'll explore how these forgotten gods still leave fingerprints on our art, our beliefs, and perhaps even our souls. The shadows are not empty. They are filled with stories waiting to be remembered. Beneath the familiar names of Zeus, Yahweh, Osiris, and Baal lies a silent pantheon gods never worshipped on altars, yet whose fingerprints remain etched across time. These were not figments of imagination, but veiled powers deities erased, conflated, or hidden behind more acceptable forms. Their stories, preserved only in the cracks of ancient architecture, or whispered through the symbols of secret societies, beckon us to reconsider what we think we know about divine history. How could gods, once revered in hidden groves or secret chambers, disappear from the collective memory of humanity? The answer may lie in the tides of power, conquest, and control. When empires rise, their gods must triumph too. History, after all, is written by the victors not just in politics, but in religion. The gods of the conquered are demonized, renamed, or forgotten. A shadow pantheon emerges, one not praised, but feared, marginalized, or simply ignored. We see glimpses of them in odd places, a strange glyph in a temple, once thought to be purely decorative, or a figure chiseled beside a well-known deity with no inscription to identify it. Consider the serpent motifs in Mesoamerican temples, the winged figures in Sumerian reliefs, or the watcher beings mentioned in the Book of Enoch. They do not neatly fit into the religious frameworks we were taught. Instead, they represent fragments of something older, more primal and perhaps deliberately hidden. These concealed gods were not necessarily evil or benevolent, but powerful. They were often associated with secret knowledge, forbidden sciences, and divine judgment. Think of Thoth in Egyptian lore, the god of wisdom, who quietly appears in so many mythologies under different names. Hermes Trismegistus to the Greeks, Enoch to the Hebrews, and even possibly Idris to the Muslims. One being, many names, each culture reshaping the same essence. Art and architecture reveal their lasting influence. Gothic cathedrals bear carvings of horned or winged beings that resemble neither angels nor devils. Renaissance paintings contain subtle symbols, like halos of unusual color or deities placed out of chronological context. The green man motif across medieval churches echoes older fertility gods, perhaps a faint homage to a forgotten divine presence. Secret societies, too, may have played a role in preserving these memories. The Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and Gnostics claimed to carry ancient truths passed down from Babylon, Egypt, and Atlantis. Within their rituals, symbols like the all-seeing eye, the compass and square, or the twin pillars allude to deeper meanings, perhaps remnants of the shadow pantheon. Not all members understood the full truth, but the lineage of these symbols suggests a reverence for lost gods too powerful to be erased completely. Ultimately, these forgotten deities didn't vanish. They transformed. Their attributes were split, distributed, and hidden in plain sight within myths, symbols, and subconscious archetypes. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, once argued that the gods never disappeared. They merely moved into the human psyche. What if the gods of old still speak, not from mountaintops or burning bushes, but from dreams, visions, and art? To explore the shadow pantheon is not to reject modern religion, but to expand our spiritual vision. It is to realize that history has layers, some too dangerous, some too sacred, to be taught openly, and perhaps, within those shadowy layers, lie answers to the questions we've long buried. Who are we? What did we forget? And what did they want us to remember? Throughout history, humanity has sought to make sense of the unseen, to frame the unknowable divine within stories, symbols, and sacred names. But what happens when parts of that divine tapestry are ripped away, censored, erased, or buried under millennia of silence? This is where the journey turns inward, toward a conscious effort to reclaim the forgotten, not to rewrite history, but to recover it, to rediscover truths lost beneath the shifting sands of time. In the modern era, a wave of spiritual seekers, scholars, and mystics have begun to question the inherited frameworks of religion. They delve into suppressed manuscripts, oral traditions, and mythologies once labeled heretical or primitive. With new tools, archaeological advancements, linguistic reconstruction, and even AI-based text analysis, they are beginning to stitch together the shattered mosaic of divine presence. The pursuit is no longer just historical. It's deeply psychological, spiritual, even existential. Consider the implications of rediscovering a forgotten God. It's not merely an academic novelty. It is a rupture in the structure of belief. If one divine presence was cast out of the narrative, how many others were, too? What facets of the divine, compassion, wrath, mystery, feminine power, creative chaos, were excised when certain gods were removed? What parts of the human soul were simultaneously suppressed? In Sumerian texts, the goddess Ereshkigal ruled the underworld, yet her story is rarely told. In the Hebrew tradition, Asherah, once honored alongside Yahweh, was demonized and written out of canon. In Greek lore, primordial entities like Nyx, chaos, or fans predate the Olympians, yet most only know the tales of Zeus. These forgotten deities often embodied the raw, uncomfortable aspects of existence, the abyss, the void, the unknown. Their erasure reflects humanity's discomfort with ambiguity, a preference for light over shadow, order over mystery. But now, the tide is turning. Artists, musicians, writers, and spiritual thinkers are weaving these ancient echoes back into the fabric of culture. Myth-inspired literature like Neil Gaiman's American Gods, spiritual philosophy in the Jungian tradition, and even online communities dedicated to mythic revival are part of this reclamation. These are not acts of rebellion, but acts of restoration, a recognition that our spiritual understanding has been incomplete, filtered through centuries of control and fear. This reclamation is not about replacing existing beliefs, but enriching them. What if understanding the divine requires more than doctrine? What if it demands imagination, courage, and a willingness to look into the forgotten corners of human consciousness? Could it be that in reuniting with the hidden gods, we also reconnect with suppressed parts of ourselves, the intuitive, the wild, the wounded, the divine? Psychologically, Jung referred to these forgotten elements as archetypes. Dormant energies in the collective unconscious, the shadow, when unacknowledged, exerts influence in distorted ways. Likewise, forgotten divine archetypes don't disappear. They merely haunt us, acting through symbols, dreams, and unconscious behavior. Reclaiming the divine is also a healing of the human psyche. And as we piece together this wider panorama of the sacred, we're confronted with a profound question: are we ready for a more complex, pluralistic spirituality? A framework that honors paradoxes instead of denying them, one that acknowledges both light and shadow, creation and destruction, masculine and feminine, known and unknowable. We live in an age of spiritual reformation, not unlike the great upheavals of the past. The printing press once liberated scriptures from priestly control. Today, the internet and digital archives are liberating forgotten wisdom from oblivion. But with access comes responsibility to approach these rediscovered truths with reverence, to question without cynicism, to imagine without dogma. The divine was never simple, and perhaps that's the point. The journey toward the forgotten God is not a descent into paganism or heresy. It is a return to a fuller, richer, deeper mystery, a divine tapestry where every thread, even the ones we once deemed unworthy, holds meaning. And by remembering what was forgotten, we might just remember who we really are. What happens when we begin to ask the questions that were never meant to be asked? What happens when a curious soul dares to peer behind the veil to search for what was forgotten, hidden, or erased? This is not merely an archaeological endeavor or a historical investigation. This is a spiritual revolution, one where the seeker refuses to be content with the curated narrative, and instead begins to reclaim pieces of the divine that were long buried beneath dogma, politics, and fear. Each time you encounter a blank space in ancient lore, or a name mysteriously left out of a sacred text, it's a whisperer beckoning, a call to go deeper. You must realize that history, especially spiritual history, is not just recorded, it's constructed. It's edited. Someone decided what you should know and what should be forgotten. That decision shaped the very framework of your faith, your worldview, your soul's story. And so, your role is not to passively inherit this edited version, but to discern, to sift through the silence, to ask, why was this God forgotten? What truth was too dangerous to preserve? By questioning the establishment, you become part of a larger awakening. You walk the same path as the ancient mystics, the desert fathers, the Gnostics, the sages who wandered the earth seeking truth that could not be contained in scrolls or systems. Your spiritual blind spots, those nagging questions you were told to ignore, are not weaknesses. They are gateways. They point you toward a more nuanced, raw, and powerful understanding of the divine. One that is not sanitized or institutionalized, but alive, paradoxical, and vast. The forgotten gods may not return in blazing glory or physical form, but their presence stirs again in dreams, in symbols, in synchronicities, and perhaps, most powerfully, in your longing for something more, something ancient, something real. This is not the end of the story. It's the turning of the page. And as you take your place in this rediscovery, remember, you are not alone. Across time, others have also felt the pull. The hidden God has always whispered. The question is, are you ready to listen? The search for the forgotten God is not just a historical quest, it's a personal one. What truths have we buried? What divine fragments still whisper in the shadows of our souls? In uncovering what was hidden, we're not just rediscovering ancient history, we're reclaiming the missing parts of ourselves. If this story awakens something in you, don't let it fade. Ask the questions. Explore the forbidden, because perhaps what was forgotten wasn't lost. It was waiting for you to remember.